Hi guys, welcome to Bible Breakdown. We're doing 2 Samuel chapter 22 and 23. Let's just start by saying we have one more chapter in 2 Samuel. Let's get a round of applause. We made it, y'all. We're at the finish line. Now, with that being said, these last two chapters, okay, so as y'all saw how I've been breaking down these books, these chapters, it's been like summaries of what happened. But these last two chapters is kind of like I don't know how to explain it. If you read it, then you know what I'm trying to say. But chapter 22 is titled David's Song of Thanksgiving. So this is just like literally David giving God thanks through a whole chapter. And then chapter 23 is David's last words. So it talks about David's last words, and then it gives it pays respect to David's the warriors of David that helped him throughout all his battles and everything that he was doing in Israel. So here are the main points of both those chapters. Okay, so chapter 22, as I said, this is David giving the Lord thanks, and throughout the whole book he's giving the Lord thanks. So from verse 2 to 4, or no, from verse 2 to 6, I said David labels God what he is to him and acknowledges how God saved him from his enemies when the times are tough. For this, he deserves praise. In verse 4, he says, I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I was saved from my enemies. Then verse 7 is confirmation that the Lord heard David wherever he was. It says, from his temple he heard my voice, and my cry for help reached his ears. Then I felt as though verses 8 to 16 kind of shows God's power and how he'll deliver at any point in time. Verse 13 and 14 say, from the radiance of his presence, blazing coals were ignited. The Lord thundered from heaven. The Most High made his voice heard. Verse 17 through 20, I said, this is an example of how God will protect his children from evil and danger in the world. He will rescue the ones that make him delightful. Verse 18 says, he rescued me from my powerful enemies and from those who hated me, for they were too strong. And then verse 19 and 20, he mentions how the Lord was his support, and he said he rescued me because he delighted in me. So for verse 21 to 29, I said, God gives you what you deserve. David was righteous and faithful to the Lord. With those actions came rewards that the Lord knew David deserved. And then I also said, he will also treat you the way you treat him. In verse 26 and 27, he says, with the faithful, you prove yourself faithful. With the blameless, you prove yourself blameless. With the pure, you prove yourself pure. But with the crooked, you prove yourself shrewd. For verse 30, I wrote in all caps, with God, all things are possible. It says, with you, I can attack a barricade, and with my God, I can leap over a wall. For verse 31, I wrote, God is above all. And then for verse 32 to 43, I wrote, the Lord is like no other. He will make us prepared for whatever comes our way. And then I referenced the song, You Are My Strength. If you guys know, You Are My Strength when I am weak. You are the treasures that I seek. Anyways, yeah. Then in verse 44 to 46, I wrote, David acknowledges how God allows him to reign over Israel and also how he gained respect from strangers. In verse 44, he says, you have preserved me as head of nations, a people I have not known serve me. And then he mentions how whenever he spoke, they obeyed him. Verse 47 to 49 explains the power that God has. And then verse 50 and 51, I wrote, David confesses the loyalty he has for the Lord forever. So that was chapter 22. I suggest you guys read it and try to really understand it for yourself, because there actually is a lot of good insight in this song of thanks that David made. Now, as I mentioned, this is chapter 23, and it talks about David's last words and the warriors that fought with David. So opening the chapter, they mention these are David's last words, and this was given to him by the Lord. The Lord literally put it on his tongue. It says in verse 2, the Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His words was on my tongue. So in verse 3 and 4, David mentions how it's important to rule over people with justice and the fear of the Lord, because he describes it as, he says, is like the morning light when the sun rises on a cloudless morning and the glistening of rain on sprouting grass. Then in verse 5, I mentioned how David shows how God provided for everything that he wanted. It says, For he established a permanent covenant with me, ordered and secured in every detail. Will he not bring about my whole salvation and my every desire? Then verse 6 and 7 is like a comparison between people that follow Christ and people that don't. So 6 is for the people that don't, and then 7 is for the people that do. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the warriors. I'm going to butcher their names. I already know it. Sorry in advance. So there's these 3 like really top dog warriors that they mention in the first couple of verses, from verse 8 to verse 11. That's when they talk about these warriors. And then after that, they talk about a story involving David and water. And then after that, they mention all the warriors. Okay, so we changed sceneries. Hello, guys. Hi. The first warrior that we're talking about is Josheb-Basshebeth. So his title was that he was the chief of the officers, and it says that he killed 800 men with a spear, all in like one day. The next person we're going to mention, his name was Eleazar, and it says that he was among the 3 that defiled the Philistines with David, and he basically stayed until the end to attack them. It talks about some people from Israel retreating like the battlefield, but Eleazar, he stayed, and it mentions how he stayed until his hand was tired and stuck to his sword. So that kind of paints the picture of how long he was there. And then the next soldier that we're talking about, his name was Shammah. So the Philistines, they were in a field full of lentils, and they were like in a formation to be in battle. And it says that the troops fled from the Philistines, but Shammah, he stayed, and he took the stand in the middle of the field, defended it, and struck down the Philistines. Verse 13 to 17 talks about that story about the water that I mentioned. So just to paraphrase, David is in the stronghold during this battle against the Philistines. It mentions how there was 3 of the 30 leading warriors that went down at harvest time and came to David at the cave of Adullam. So David was very thirsty, and he says to them, "If only someone would bring me water to drink from the well at the city of Bethlehem." So there was 3 warriors that decided that they were going to go through the Philistines like campgrounds to get this water for David. So they get the water, they bring it back to David, and instead of David drinking the water, he actually pours it down in the ground as an offering to the Lord. In verse 17 it says, "David said, 'Lord, I would never do such a thing. Is this not the blood of men who risked their lives?'" So he didn't drink it because he was like showing his gratitude to the men that risked their lives to get him water. So now we transition. They're talking about Abishai now, and he is the leader / commander of the 3 big warriors that I mentioned. And Abishai is so good and highly favored because he killed 300 men with his spear. Now this next man, he's the last man that has his like own description about what he's done. His name is Benaiah. I could be wrong, but so apparently he is the one that was in charge of David's bodyguards. I'm not sure if that means he was David's bodyguard or if he was just like head of the bodyguards. But what he did says he killed 2 Moab warriors. He killed a lion, and he killed an Egyptian. Now with the Egyptian, it says, even though the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaiah went down to him with a staff, snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and then killed him with his own spear. And then from verse 24 to the end, 29, it mentions all 30 of the men that was like on David's team. And then the last verse says there were 37 in all. So there was 37 men that was like in David's army. That is the end of chapter 23. That's all I have for y'all. Tomorrow we will do the last chapter of 2 Samuel. I love y'all. God loves y'all more. Have a great night.